It was a Saturday like any other, the kind you forget to appreciate until something unforgivable happens under the clear blue sky. And we'd taken our son, Jonah, to the neighborhood park, his favorite place in the world because of the swings, the soft wood chips underfoot, and the rhythm of routine he'd memorized down to the second. Jonah is 8, autistic, and brilliant in the ways that most people never see. He doesn't talk much, but when he does, it's with precision, and when he plays with a deep intensity, measured movements, repetition, comfort in the familiar. That day, he wore his favorite blue dinosaur hoodie, the one with the fraying cuffs and the tiny embroidered patch that says, "RAR means I love you," and he was standing in line for the slide, humming softly to himself as he does when he's regulating his emotions. I was sitting on the bench a few yards away, sipping my coffee, watching him like I always do, not hovering, but aware, because that's what you do when your child is different in a world that too often punishes difference. Everything seemed fine until I saw her, Karen. Everyone in our HOA knows her. Mid-50s, brittle blonde bob, mirrored sunglasses like they're part of a uniform, and the kind of grim expression that suggests she was born angry and has simply been refining the craft ever since. She's on the HOA board, self-appointed moral compass of the neighborhood, and takes it upon herself to enforce rules that don't exist with a level of zeal that would embarrass actual law enforcement. I noticed her only because she was walking toward the playground with that tight-lipped scowl I've come to recognize as the prelude to confrontation. At first, I thought maybe she was coming for one of the older kids playing tag too close to the landscaping, but then she zeroed in on Jonah, who was still humming quietly, still moving through the motions of his routine, waiting for his turn at the slide. Something about the way he rocked slightly, the way he avoided eye contact with a kid behind him who had been pestering him to hurry up, must have triggered her internal alarm because she didn't hesitate. She walked right up to him, got into his space, and I stood immediately, setting down my coffee, already moving, but I was too far. I saw her point, then raise her voice. I couldn't hear the words, but I saw Jonah flinch. He backed away from the slide, clearly confused, looking around for me, his small hands rising defensively. And then it happened, so fast and yet burned into my memory with frame-by-frame clarity. Karen slapped him. Hard. One open-handed strike across the cheek. Jonah stumbled backward, landed on the mulch with a thud, and started rocking, his eyes wide with terror. I was already running, heart pounding, a sound leaving my throat that I didn't recognize. Half shout, half roar, all instinct. I reached them in seconds, and she turned just in time to see me, just in time to see the father whose son she had just assaulted. "What the hell did you just do?" I barked, standing between her and my son, who was now whimpering softly, curled into himself like a wound. Karen didn't back down. "He was being aggressive," she snapped. "He pushed the other child. He wouldn't respond. He looked unstable." "He's autistic," I said, voice shaking with restrained fury. "He was overstimulated. He wasn't hurting anyone. I don't care what his excuse is," she spat. "If his parents can't teach him how to act right, maybe someone else needs to." That was it. That was the moment the ground shifted beneath me, the moment I realized I wasn't just dealing with ignorance, I was dealing with cruelty. Cold, calculated cruelty aimed at a child who couldn't defend himself, couldn't explain himself, and had just been physically assaulted by a woman who thought her HOA title gave her moral license. I took a deep breath, crouched beside Jonah, gently touched his arm. "It's okay, buddy. Daddy's here." He looked at me, blinking rapidly, trying to calm himself, and I whispered his favorite phrase, "RAR means I love you." He nodded slowly, still trembling. I looked back up at Karen. "You just assaulted a disabled minor." "I corrected a dangerous child," she snapped. "You're lucky I didn't call the real police." I stood. My voice, when it came, was quiet. Too quiet. "Ma'am, I am the real police. I'm a federal judge, and you just committed felony assault against a protected person under federal disability statutes." She blinked. Just once. And I saw the first flicker of fear. But she doubled down, because people like her always do. "That's ridiculous," she said. "You're bluffing." I pulled out my badge wallet. Not because I needed to prove myself. Because I wanted her to understand exactly how far she just overstepped. "You're going to be charged," I said. "And you're going to lose everything you think you're in control of. Because you just hit my son." The other parents were gathering now. Whispers, gasps, phones raised. Someone had filmed it. Good. Let them. Karen looked around and finally realized the tide had turned. She stepped back, muttering something about not meaning to, and started walking briskly toward her car. I didn't stop her. Not yet. I had everything I needed. I turned back to Jonah, lifted him gently into my arms, and held him close. "You're safe," I whispered. "I've got you. She's never getting near you again." And as I carried him back to the car, my mind had already shifted into courtroom mode: facts, statutes, case law, witnesses. Because the woman who thought she could slap a child into silence had no idea that she just crossed a line drawn not in mulch and playground rules, but in federal law. By the time we got home that day, Jonah had calmed down just enough to want his weighted blanket, his favorite sensory puzzle, and a few minutes in a hammock on the back porch, where the breeze and the rocking could pull him back from the brink, back to center. I sat beside him the entire time, the rage still simmering under my skin like a slow, rolling boil, and though my hands were still, my mind was already in motion, shifting from father to federal judge in a matter of seconds. I presided over racketeering cases, high-profile assaults, constitutional challenges, and class-action lawsuits, but nothing in my entire career prepared me for the fury that comes with seeing your own child hurt by someone so callous, so arrogant, and so completely convinced that she could get away with it. Karen had slapped my son, lied about it, walked away without remorse, and assumed, like she always had, that the rules didn't apply to her. What she didn't know, what she couldn't possibly have known, was that I wasn't just some scared dad with a Facebook account and a Yelp review. I was the law. I started with the basics. First, I called in a welfare check not on Karen, but on Jonah to get official documentation into the system. The officer who responded knew me personally, and when I explained what happened, his eyes widened. "You're going after her, aren't you?" "Oh," I said, "I'm not going after her. I'm bringing her down." He filed the report. I requested a copy. Then I called a child psychologist I'd worked with on a previous court case and scheduled an emergency evaluation for Jonah, not to re-traumatize him, but to get a professional record of the emotional impact of the assault. Because make no mistake, what Karen had done wasn't just a moment of bad judgment or a slap in anger. It was a criminal act under both state and federal law. Section 249 of the U.S. Code defines hate crimes against individuals based on disability. Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act protects children like Jonah in public spaces. And state code defined any unwanted physical contact against a minor as battery. Add in the disability clause. That made it a felony. Next, I pulled the security footage from the park. Our HOA had insisted on installing cameras last year. Karen's idea, ironically, to reduce vandalism and protect community assets. I called in a subpoena to the property management company, and within 24 hours I had the digital files in my inbox. I watched the footage once. Only once, because once was enough. I saw Jonah flinch, saw Karen raise her hand, saw the impact, saw him fall. It made me nauseous, but it also made the case airtight. I didn't just have hearsay, I had timestamp video proof. And then came the phone calls. A mother of one of the boys on the playground called me that night. "We saw everything," she said, her voice trembling. "My son keeps asking why that lady hit your boy." Another neighbor messaged me. "We've all had issues with her. But this crossed the line." By the end of the weekend, I had 6 witness statements, signed, notarized, detailed, each one matching Jonah's account. Karen, meanwhile, must have sensed the pressure, because she started her usual damage control campaign. Flyers on doors blaming misinformation, claiming she had intervened to stop bullying, and suggesting that my son was becoming a danger to other children. I didn't dignify any of it with a response. I let her speak. Because the more she talked, the more rope she gave herself. I sent every flyer to my lawyer. I also filed a temporary restraining order against her on behalf of Jonah, citing the video, the police report, and a professional evaluation from the psychologist, which noted signs of acute stress response and emotional regression following the incident. We'd come so far with Jonah. He'd worked so hard to manage his world. And this woman, this self-appointed HOA tyrant, thought she could knock all that progress loose with one slap and a pamphlet. She had no idea who she was dealing with. The sheriff's office called me back a few days later. "We're ready to move forward," the investigator said. "You've given us everything. We've spoken to the witnesses. We've reviewed the footage. The DA agrees this meets the threshold for felony battery of a disabled minor." I closed my eyes and nodded, not with satisfaction, but with grim resolve. "Good," I said, "because I want her charged publicly. No backroom plea deals." No sealed settlements. I want her name on that docket. And I wasn't done. I also filed a formal judicial complaint to the state bar against the HOA's legal counsel, who tried to dismiss the incident as an unfortunate misunderstanding in an email that leaked, to their misfortune, onto the community message board. It turned out Karen wasn't just a board member. She'd been chairing the so-called safety committee, using HOA funds to sponsor community patrols where she and a few of her friends would stalk the neighborhood under the guise of monitoring disorderly conduct. I had the receipts, meeting notes, budget approvals, emails, enough to trigger an IRS audit on misappropriation of funds alone. But none of that compared to what she'd done to my son. I wasn't after her job. I wasn't after a settlement. I was after accountability, real, permanent, public accountability. I wanted her charged, convicted, sentenced. And more than anything, I wanted her neighbors, the very ones she'd scared and bullied for years, to see her for what she truly was. Not a guardian of order, but a threat to the very community she claimed to protect. Emily, a single mother 2 doors down, knocked on my door with tears in her eyes. She grabbed my daughter's wrist last summer when she stepped on her roses, she said. I didn't report it. I didn't think anyone would believe me. I looked her dead in the eye. They will now. And Jonah? He was slowly recovering. We stuck to his routine. Extra time with the hammock, more quiet afternoons, soft-voiced reassurances that she was gone and not coming back. But he didn't want to go back to the park. It's not safe, he whispered one night. That broke me. Not because he was wrong, but because he was right. Until she was gone, it wasn't safe. Not for him. Not for any child like him. So I made a vow. I would make it safe. And I would make it loud. Because sometimes justice isn't about punishment. It's about making sure no one ever dares do it again. And for the first time in her life, HOA Karen was about to meet someone who not only knew the law better than she did, but was the law. The day of the arraignment hearing was gray, fittingly somber, as though the sky itself knew it was about to witness something overdue, a reckoning long postponed by fear, denial, and unchecked entitlement, now crashing down on the woman who'd spent years ruling our neighborhood like it was her private kingdom. I dressed in the same gray suit I wore for hearings in federal courtrooms, not out of vanity, but for presence, a reminder that I was not some angry parent pleading for scraps of attention. I was the embodiment of the legal system Karen thought she could skirt. Emily, the mother who'd shared her daughter's story, came too, along with 2 other residents who had submitted sworn affidavits. We sat in the gallery, quietly dignified, while Karen walked into the courtroom in a beige cardigan and oversized sunglasses, trying to look meek, remorseful, an act no doubt rehearsed in front of her bathroom mirror. But even then, she couldn't help but glare when her eyes met mine. There was no remorse, only resentment. She was charged with felony assault of a disabled minor under State Penal Code Section 273-UB, with the aggravating factor of the victim being protected under the Americans with Disabilities Act, a detail that transformed what could have been a misdemeanor into a full-scale criminal offense. The courtroom was silent as the judge read the charges aloud. I didn't blink. Karen's attorney, a discount defense specialist known more for parking tickets than courtroom prowess, mumbled some excuse about lack of intent and confusion at the scene, but the DA shut it down swiftly. The defendant approached the child. The defendant made physical contact. The defendant has a history of targeting vulnerable residents under the guise of HOA enforcement. And the defendant, when confronted, showed no remorse, only arrogance. I sat still. I didn't react. But I felt Emily's hand tighten on the bench next to mine. Across the room, Karen's smug mask cracked for the first time. Her fingers twitched, her mouth pressed into a hard, dry line. She'd hired a PR firm too. Tried to spin the narrative on social media with stage apologies, community service photos, and vague references to a difficult-time misunderstanding evolving community needs. It didn't work. Not when the video hit the news cycle. Not when local papers ran the headline, HOA board member charged with assaulting autistic child. Not when people from across the state started flooding the HOA's website demanding her removal. And not when Jonah's story made it to the front page of a national parenting blog. Anonymized, yes, but real, honest, and devastating. Karen was quickly suspended from her HOA position. Her cronies resigned quietly. A few tried to distance themselves with whispered apologies, and I never really agreed with her anyway energy, but it didn't matter. The damage was done. Karen had become a pariah. And the hearing wasn't just a legal formality. It was a public unveiling of what she'd truly been all along. After the arraignment, the HOA called an emergency community meeting. By then, it was less about damage control and more about survivor testimony. I didn't speak first. I didn't need to. A father stood and said, "She screamed at my daughter for wearing a tutu in the common area." A mother followed. "She once told my son he needed to wear shoes on our own porch." Then Emily, "She put her hands on my child." I didn't press charges, but I wish I had. And then finally I stood. I looked around the room, not as a judge, not as a man in a suit, but as a father. "I've sentenced men for racketeering," I said. "I've presided over federal corruption cases. But I've never been angrier in a courtroom than I was the day I watched that video of my son being slapped. You could hear a pin drop. He's autistic. Not broken. Not dangerous. Not disposable. And he deserves to swing and laugh and hump to himself without being policed by someone who thinks power is the same thing as righteousness." I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I just let the words land like bricks on the hearts of everyone who'd been silent for too long. Karen didn't attend. Her lawyer advised against it. She was out on bail, facing potential sentencing that ranged from probation and community service to up to 4 years in state custody, depending on how the court ruled after the trial. But I already knew what the outcome would be. Not just because of my position, but because the truth had too much weight, too much evidence, too many witnesses. She'd crossed a line, and the world had seen it. She couldn't spin this. She couldn't find her way out of it or slip a HOA memo under someone's door and call it closure. The damage was public, permanent, and personal. Jonah didn't understand hearing. He didn't need to. But he understood that she wouldn't come near him again. He understood when we walked past the park, and he said, "She's not there now." And I said, "She never will be again." We replaced the bench near the slide with a new one. A small plaque underneath it read, "For every child who hums while waiting their turn." Jonas sat on it the next day, quietly assembling his puzzle pieces on the wood. And I sat beside him, no longer haunted by the memory of what happened, but grounded in the knowledge that something had been done. Karen's sentencing was scheduled for 2 months later. I didn't attend. I didn't need to see her plead or posture or play victim. I didn't care if she cried. I cared that the sentence stuck. I cared that the record showed exactly what she'd done. And I cared that everyone who'd been too scared to stand up before now knew what power looked like when it was wielded correctly. Because the rule of law isn't about vengeance. It's about protection. About accountability. And sometimes it's about making sure that a little boy in a blue dinosaur hoodie never has to wonder whether his silence makes him a target. It doesn't. It never did. And because of that, she will never walk this neighborhood as anything more than a cautionary tale.